everyone. Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming back from the coffee. Yeah, I'm Stéphanie Walter. You can Google me. I basically have a blog and big online presence. I've spent more than the last 10 years designing different things. And what I've noticed is often we design this kind of pixel perfect scenario. We're like, okay, this is the page, how we imagine that's the perfect state, perfect everything, perfect content, perfect browser size, perfect users who will always do what we expect them to do, right? In real life, though, it gets a little bit messy. So today I want to talk a little bit about and explore all the different ways that we need to adapt our designers to take into account the complexity, the technological one, but also the user complexity. Let's start talking about different states. So we imagine, okay, our page is opening and then it loads. Well, actually, there can be a lot of things between the moment the user clicks to ask for the page and the moment it's loaded. So the first thing we need to talk about is loading states, is what is going to happen at page level or at component level if my page takes a lot of time to load. So I'm not saying you need loading states all the time, but I work in enterprise UX and we have technical debt, to say it nicely, where we have some pages that might or might not, I can deny, take 10 seconds to load, which is an improvement, by the way. So at some point, we need to figure something out. So the cool thing is we actually have a skeleton screen, and then the different modules of the page are going to load one by one, so you can have half of the page loaded and some components working. But yeah, as a designer, I need to think about that. What happens if it takes forever? What can we do so that the user is still comfortable with that? Let's talk about errors. Perfect. Yeah, so then, has it loaded? Yes, no, maybe. Then we need to talk about error states. So usually we come with a 4 or 4, but here again, there's some design opportunities. The one from GitHub is quite nice. They have a fun little octocat making a joke, but on top of that, they have a search. So here you're not stuck. You can actually search for something else. They also have the footer links. So they have different things where you're like, okay, there's a problem here. I don't know what's happening, but at least I'm not stuck. I can go somewhere else from here. Sometimes we don't have that change. So for my current users, we have this page where we have a lot of tile, and it's very modular. We're using React to do that. And every single tile is loading on its own, and it calls different web services. And sometimes, unfortunately, someone pushed something in production without telling us. And then we end up with something like that. So in an ideal world for your error states, what you want to have is tell the user how they can recover. In our case here, most of the time, if this breaks, is because there's a technical problem. So all they can do is contact us in case we are not already aware that we have a problem with the service or something. So then, okay, it loads. We don't have any error. We have content. Maybe we don't have content, actually, which is different from having an error. So here again, when you don't have content, it's an interesting design opportunity. So the Doc Martens search, if they can't find any issues for you, what they do, they're pushing you a couple of things. They're pushing you women, kids, and they're pushing the bestsellers. So the idea is, again, if you're going to design such state, make sure that the user knows where to go from here. We have task app. And well, when the user doesn't have any tasks, that's good, actually. That means they did their job. So we try to do something that I call corporate delight, which is a little illustration. I work for a bank, so this is as fun as it gets. But yeah, we have this kind of little illustration, and we're selling, oh, all code up, yay, something like that. So it's nice because here, if you have empty content, it's an opportunity for the designer also to express a little bit more, a little bit of fun. It's also an opportunity to teach how to not have an empty state. So that's our homepage with the saved search. If you don't have any saved search yet, we are basically explaining to you what you need to do in order to make sure this page is not empty anymore. So here again, there's a lot of things you can do that you can use empty states for onboarding, for instance. If you have an application, a website where people will be able to create content, but don't have content yet. So how do we design all of that? The main thing is we need to make sure we don't forget about all of those states. So we have basically two things. We have on the left the components, in the design system, where for my error states, I have something very, very generic. And then for Jira ticket, what we have is we have this checklist on the right, checklist or cheat sheet, depends how you call it. But it's basically when you write a new ticket, you copy paste all of that, and we make sure you don't forget anything. So here we try to make sure that if there's an error state, if there's an empty, if there's content missing, then my business analyst, who's the one writing the story, doesn't forget about this. Still making the noise, I'm sorry. So, adapting to density, we have content. Question is, how much? Well, we can have too much content, too little, perfect amount, and we can have conditional content. So, the perfect amount is usually what we design. Here I have a card, I have operation contract counterparts, and I have all my tiles. It's perfect, we have 5, which is a very nice number, it works. What happens when we have less? Usually, not that bad. It kind of just stretches down. The problem is if we have too many. So this thing is on the home page. What do I do if I have too many? One solution would be to maybe have a fixed height and have pagination. Another solution would be have a min height, something like that, max height, and then have a scroll bar. So here again, it's not very complex, but as a designer, at some point, my developer will come to me and say, okay, it's a nice design, you have 5 elements. What happened? How does this stretch when I have 10? What do I do? Do I do the whole thing? Design decision to take. I work at a bank, again, where people put a little bit of content or the whole Lord of the Rings sometimes in one input. So yeah, we end up with a lot of stuff like that, which is way to flexibly show the content, where we like, if it's more than that many characters, we split, we have a show more, show less. Otherwise, it's going to be a giant mess on some pages. It will be very, very unbalanced. So yeah, if you work at the bank or if you have user-generated content, at some point this might happen, and you need kind of mechanism to make sure it works. So a couple of tips on scaling content. Usually, I ask the developers for the limits of those fields in the database. I'm like, okay, what's the minimum? What's the maximum? What's the average? I try to design for the average, but I try to cover what happens if it's becoming very, very big. Then also, we're using fake content because we're not allowed to use real content. But what we are doing when we're using fake content is we're trying to fake it in a way that it's close to the reality. So kind of the close to the real length for our mockups so that we can stress test a little bit. And then, yeah, always prepare for more content, especially if you have user-generated content. So, next thing is conditional content. What happens if I have user-generated content? For instance, I have an image and the user didn't upload any. There's again a couple of things that you can do. You can say, you know what, for my cooking recipe, if the user doesn't put an image, I'm going to put the logo. Or we are going to communicate with the developer and say, well, if it doesn't have an image, I want the whole thing to stretch. And the really, really cool thing is in CSS, we have a CSS selector that is called has that is supposed to help you select the parent, but you can use it for conditions. I'm not going to go through the whole article, but Ahmad Sadid, I hope I pronounced that right, has an amazing article on that, on how you can do exactly that, use the parent selector. It's in the slide, you have the links, so don't worry. But yeah, basically you can do stuff like that. You can tell your developer, maybe at some point we will not have any image, and then they can foresee in CSS what can they do about that. Another thing is, if I have more content, maybe the title will be bigger. What happens if the title goes bigger? With my metadata, let's call them not like that, on the right. Does it go at the top? Does it go at the middle? Again, it's easy to fix. Flexbox, you change one value, done. The thing is, you need to tell your developer what do you expect for that. And then usually we love this masonry gallery where everything has the same height. The problem is, again, as soon as you have user-generated content, you end up with different heights. So here again, in CSS, you can use don't max and min. It's mostly about taking design decisions on, do we fix the height, do we let it stretch, stuff like that. So a lot of things is basically communicating what you expect when your content is going to grow. And then we have something like that, which is what happens if I don't have any value yet for that content. So for my cooking recipe site, I have my fake cooking recipe site, I have some stars. And basically, if we don't have any vote, we don't have any stars. The problem with this design is it's misleading. people might see the first one at the top and say, this recipe is not good. No, it's not good, it's just we don't have any votes. So what would we do? We could change the design for that, so have an exception for the components that says no rating available. We could not display any rating. And then you ask the question, okay, how many rating do you need in order to have a kind of an accurate rating for that cooking recipe? So here again, it's very small detail, but it's the kind of stuff you need to think about as a designer. So yeah, for content scalability and conditional, you don't need to design all of that. Most of the time what happens is you design something and then your developer implements it and they come back to you and say, oh, by the way, what happens when it's stretched? So it's really about more having a conversation, having communication, otherwise you will not have time. Another cool thing is we can have adaptive layouts. So most of the time when we design components, they exist in 3 different sizes. So again, my cooking recipe, it exists on large with metadata on the right, medium version, no more metadata on the right, but I'm keeping the image on the left, and then I have a small version with the image at the top. And to save some space, I put the save on top of the image, something like that. Usually, this is something you would use for responsive web design. You would say, okay, small version, more small screens. The bigger the screen, we switch to M and then to L at some point, and we are going to trigger media query. What about if I want to reuse this in different contexts? So the really, really cool thing that we've been waiting for years is container queries. So now you will be able not only to use a component that will be able to kind of adapt the size to the viewport, but also to whatever container, so parents, in which you are going to throw these components. So that's the main difference. You have media query, we've had them for years, where you are kind of doing that for responsive web design, and then container query, we check the size of the parents. So let me give you a demo by Max Bock. So that's the same component that is automatically adapting in 3 different sizes, depending if it's on the left, in the middle, or on the right. And that's just CSS. Yay. So that's going to be very, very cool. I don't know how excited I am about that because it's early in the morning, but yeah, that's going to be a game changer because then you will build components and they will adapt to whatever parent. So you can do cool stuff in Figma. You can kind of fake this if you start playing around with auto layout. So usually how I document this in Figma is I'm going to have my component in different size. I'm going to start stretching it. And at some point I'm like, nah, this now doesn't work. At this point, I'm switching to the medium size. And then I continue. I'm going to like stretch it, and I'm like, nah, here maybe we can have the large size. And this is basically how I decide about the intervals I want for either responsive web design or container query by kind of using the auto layout in Figma and stress testing it. If you don't have Figma and your developer is able to do that in the browser, it's the same idea. You sit next to the developer, you watch them play around with the thingy, getting bigger, and at some point you're like, yeah, it's not working anymore. Like the line height is too big. Maybe we switch to the medium and then switch to the large one. So this is kind of the main topic of the talk, which is, as designer, we need to stop obsessing over pixel perfection. We need to understand that the media we are going to design for is fluid, is flexible. And then, yeah, I still have so many project managers who are like, yeah, but it's not pixel perfect like it is in Figma and all of that. Like, yeah, at some point it's going to grow, it's going to go smaller. We need to start maybe designing in tools, Figma, Sketch, Act, whatever. And then we need to decide in browser. We need to go very early in the browser to make sure that this is flexible. And then we want to adapt to user situation. For now, I haven't talked about users. I only talked about technical constraints. But if you bring user in the mix in here, you have a whole other giant piece of fun to adapt your components. So the first thing is interaction. It's like, okay, the page is loaded, but now the user wants to do something on that page. Maybe you have buttons, maybe you have links, maybe you have super complex components. So the first thing we need to talk about and to think about, and I hope most designers do that those days, is what are the different states? What does a button look like when it's by default, when it's hovered? What does it look like when it's focused? This is super important for accessibility, and that's one of the things you can audit actually, like Anna was talking about auditing your design files also, is like make sure the focus ring is accessible. What does it look like when it's active, when it's disabled? Same for inputs. So most of us, I think, know as designers, we do these kind of things where in the design system, we are going to make sure we have all the different components in all the different states. But yeah, if you're a developer and there's a missing states, go to your designer, talk to them, ask them, oh, you don't have any focus, what am I supposed to do with that? Can we add it so it's documented somewhere? Then I usually ask myself for complex components, how will this work? So I have a component that is a drop-down that is going to open a list of pages, and then the user can click on one of those. This is something I also usually need to document. It's like, how is the user going to interact with that step by step? So here I gave you an easy component. I usually do that for more complex one where you have a drop-down, and in the drop-down you have multiple select, and then you have like select on select, and then you have apply. And so let's go for the easy route. Here we are trying to understand how is someone going to interact with that with the mouse first. And then what we need also to think about, again, for accessibility, how is someone going to interact with the keyboard? Because for accessibility, people need to be able to do the same thing they do with the mouse with a keyboard. And this is going to be a whole more lot of fun because often people are not kind of that aware of that. And again, as Anna was saying, is okay. Document yourself, start learning, it's a process, it's perfectly fine. But yeah, this is the kind of stuff we document for the developer. We think about mouse, we think about how is this going to work with keyboard, so how do you open it, how do you close it, how do you go through the different elements inside my dropdown. And then we have touch. So most of the time, touch and mouse are the same thing, except when we display stuff that work on hover. The problem is if you have a tooltip that works on hover, it might display for half a second until the person clicks on it. So I had this debate with a friend who was redoing their portfolio and they wanted to do something fancy with only icons. And I was like, yeah, but I'm not sure everyone will understand the icons. And they went, okay, I will put a tooltip on there. It's like, yeah, but then touch users, they will not understand what's going on. Because they will touch on it, it will showcase the tooltip half a second, and then it will vanish. So in the end, what we ended up doing is like, yeah, why don't we just put it in plain text? It's also better for accessibility. It's better for everyone because then you don't have to guess. I'm pretty sure if I show you the third icon, maybe the FAQ you can guess. Services, I'm quite sure you don't understand what it is without the tooltip. So yeah, basically by thinking about how does this work for touch, complicated, we improved the design and we said, you know what, we will simply have the label so that it's easier. So what we can do as designers here, usually what I do is at the beginning of the project or before starting a component, I'm going to build a user flow or task flow. Is what you have on the left of my screen, it's kind of a representation, very abstract with the little boxes of how someone will navigate with something. By doing that, I make sure that, again, when I'm foreseeing a component or like a page flow, something like that, there's no dead ends, and I'm sure that the person is going to be able to work with it. Then what I showed you, interactive flow on the right, which is step-by-step documenting everything and how a component is going to work with mouse and with keyboard navigation. Okay, let's talk about user preference. Now it's becoming fun. So, you design the perfect stuff, but the user can enable or disable a couple of options in their operating system that you might need to take into account. So the most well-known is dark mode. This has been around for a while. There's in CSS you use prefers color scheme, and you can detect if the user has dark mode at operation system level or at browser level. It's very nice because then you can respect it. One thing though is like some people have their operating system in dark mode but the browser in light mode because they're okay with the UI being in dark but they cannot read the text. So I really like what Firefox does. It's like basically it's giving you a choice. Do you want to follow the system theme? Do you want to always have light or always have dark? And I think he redesigned the site, so if you're going to check his site, I don't think he still has the dark mode. But yeah, that's the idea. User can switch to dark mode if you want. You can implement a whole, not maybe a second CSS, but implement some small CSS modification on your components. to cater for that. Some people might need a higher contrast. So I want you to pay attention to the links, the purple links on the left. So when I'm switching to more contrast on Mac, I don't know if you see it in the back, but what happens is the link were light purple, they become darker purple. So it's not changing the whole site, but what Tetralogical is doing here is for people who need more contrast due to accessibility preferences, they are making their purple a little bit darker. It's not their visual dynamic intensity purple anymore, but it's okay. At some point, if people need more contrast, let's give it to them. So you can do that in CSS, prefers contrast. Again, it doesn't have to be a big change. It's just improving a little bit the contrast of the text so that people can read it in a better way. Another thing, that's an example from Adam Argyle. So what he does, he uses force colors in CSS to adapt the website when the user enforces this limited color palette. So this is only on Windows for now. But when I'm switching to this, what he does is like he brings more boundaries on some elements so it's easier to see them or distinguish them. So you have kind of a dark border. When you hover the element, you have a strong border as well, stuff like that. So here again, it's very, very small sort of touches, but it's just like helping people who need this kind of accessibility features read the web a little bit better. Then we have motion sickness. So some animation on websites or video game can trigger motion sickness. In order to avoid that, well, you have something in CSS that is called prefers reduced motion, so it's the same idea. So that's an old demo from a couple of years ago where I have stuff that moves. I don't think you see it. Yeah, I have shooting stars. That's very annoying for people with motion sickness. There's a lot moving around. And then when I'm clicking on reduce motion on Mac, it's basically removing the whole motion. It's completely removing the shooting stars. And the solar system is still working, but it's very, 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 very slow. But that's the idea. You can also adapt your animation to user preferences if they want less motion. And there's more coming. So we'll have inverted colors if you want to adapt when the operation system is inverted. It's impossible to take a screenshot of that because if you do, it's taking it in the normal, so I had to take a picture, but that's the idea. And prefers reduced transparency that is currently being implemented in the latest versions of Chrome, which is if people don't like transparency effects, because again, like the whole blur might trigger some sort of nausea, motion sickness, headaches, you can remove it with that. So here I would say, as designers, you need to be aware this exists, and then I would peer up with developers to see where I can change a couple of little things to adapt this. And I will test that with different people with different disabilities to make sure that it works perfectly. Then we can adapt to user journey. So what happens if the user doesn't have any connection? We have JavaScript service workers. We can do cool stuff like that. So the blog of Sarah Sweden, you can put a page and you can like save it for offline, and then when you come back, you can actually read it. Financial Times Weekend, what they do is they're caching today's issue. So if you're going there, you open the website, and then you come back. If you don't have any connection, you can still read today's edition articles. So it's a couple of things that we start implementing to say, okay, let's also adapt to if the user doesn't have any connection. What happens if they had a connection, they tried to do something, but they lost the connection in between? So now we are really, really, really going into the edge cases, but this is the kind of stuff. So if you imagine Gmail, I'm sending an email, I lose connection the moment it's sent, or synchronization, Dropbox, Google Drive, whatever. So here it means for my component, I might need a little bit of extra steps. So I have the ideal component again, everything is synchronized, the email was sent perfect. I might need a synchronization failed status that says, oh wait, we were not able to synchronize this. And then if the connection is back, I might need to say, oh, it's synchronizing at the moment. And then once it's synchronized, if the user had a pop-up that say we had a problem synchronizing, it would be nice to say to them, oh, okay, now it's all good. So this can be all done in the background, but if the user is on the interface at that time, it might be nice that they know exactly what's going on, what was synchronized or not. So it's very edge case, but if you're starting to think about that, especially native application, but it's also coming to the web. It's even more states that we need to think about. And then I have an example of a step-by-step app to bring your car to the dealership outside of opening hours. There's a couple of things that happen there. It's not a real identity. I was not allowed to use the client, so I put mine there. But it's not also the real car. Don't try to guess. So depending on the steps, you might have small adaptations. So here again, I have like one component that will change a little bit depending if the car arrived, if we are in the next step, the previous step, all of that. And here we have a component that is adapting to the user journey directly. So how do we achieve that? Well, we need to understand content. We need to understand how people use the product. And here we clearly need to go beyond interfaces. We need really to understand our users. So this is why we do user research. So on the right here, you have an example of a user journey map. Well, not an example, a visualization, but that's the idea. Go beyond, understand your users if you want to build all of those things. And then, yeah, reach out to your developers if you're designers, maybe, or the other way around. If you're developers, maybe your designers don't know you can do all of that, like prefers reduced motion, offline support, stuff like that. So it's about collaboration, making sure that if there's something technically possible that will improve user life, let's go for it. And the last part is a little bit abstract, is about really going beyond our assumptions, beyond our happy path, beyond what we think people will do, react, and how they work. So I love that one. Basically, it's a tweet that says, as a past job, I didn't catch that our system required 3 or more characters for at least name. I had to pull the backend engineer aside and go, so you know our new VP, his name is Lee, right? I have people whose name is M in some of our stuff. So basically, why do we assume name can have less than 3 characters, and why do we block those people? And then what happens when you put like validation gate on top of wrong assumption? Some people assume that the E acute of my name is not a character they should support in their database, apparently. So end up with stuff like that, where I'm being shamed for having, what was the stuff, non-English characters. Yeah, well, so my advice here is, if people don't understand that, ask me, do you want Beyoncé as a client? Because she has the character too. So if she can't fill your form, then neither can I, but okay. But yeah, that's the idea. We start with bad assumption, we put validation gate on top of it. Meh. This is also amazing. So it's a 2-factor authentication from Sony. I'm on my phone, I'm supposed to scan a QR code, so I blacked out the QR code, but like, I cannot scan a QR code on my phone. That's not, well, I might need a second one, but okay. So they're like, yeah, don't worry, we have a key you can copy paste in your stuff, except they're disabling the user selection on the whole website. I would love to know what happens, how many assumptions went into deciding that we need to stop people from copy-pasting stuff in mobile. I was like, yeah, maybe it works for most of your site, but once they actually need to copy-paste it, to authenticate, they can't. So be super careful about assumptions because it will bite you at some point somewhere. And then is my default the right assumption for everyone? If you get a notification that's like, yeah, congratulations, you've lost 2 kilograms in the last month. Well, what if I'm someone who's sick and I'm tracking my weight to make sure I'm not losing too much because it would mean that I'm going worse? So the congratulations, yeah. No, so you can prevent that. You could ask exactly if the person wants to lose weight, wants to gain. So you could do a little bit of asking back and forth before in the journey to avoid things like that. But yeah, usually we're like, yeah, happiness, delight. It's like, yeah, but not always. So that's an example from Cassie where she basically saying she was, yeah, sorry, trigger warning, death, not fun stuff, but she was listening to music in loop when her grandma was sick. And Spotify is like, yeah, you've listened a lot to this music. This must be your favorite music. Like, nope, again. So she's saying like, yeah, algorithmically generated memory can be super dangerous because you have no idea why that person listened to that in loop. Maybe it's like me, because I'm able to listen the whole thing in loop for a year and it would be okay, but if you enter in this position, it's very hard. So I don't have a lot of solutions here. It's most about challenging assumption, building more diverse teams, always asking why, always asking, okay, but are we doing the right thing here? Is it going to be annoying? Something like that. And then, yeah, is it going to be annoying, irritating, stressful to users? I've basically kept the Amazon notification because it's so fun. So I don't know why they decided that in Luxembourg I really need Gummistiefeln in different size and colors. It's like, hey, do you want blue one? No, okay, maybe the yellow one. Hey, what about the red? Then I got green. I don't know how many. I was like, come on, why? I've never bought clothes on Amazon. But like, yeah, it's very annoying. I keep them to have examples, but the real user, once they get annoyed, they will basically say, okay, bye. And then what about how something might get abused? So that's Telegram, is letting you know when someone who you have in your contact is on Telegram. And I was talking about that with a couple of people online. And it was like, okay, that's very nice, but what if one of my crazy ex has, like a lady was, I have a stalker, a crazy ex-stalker, and then now he knows I'm on this one, so I've blocked him everywhere. I had someone who told me, yeah, I have abusive family members. And then again, this is just notifying them that they can come and annoy me on yet another platform. So here again, it's about how something might be abused, and then how can we, in our design, go beyond the happy path, and add maybe some fail-safes. So there's a couple of things you can do. There's something that is called bad actor brainstorming session, where you're basically putting a lot of people in the room who might have answers to that, and you're like, okay, let's discuss how what we are building might be abused, might be used for bad, and see how we could shield the users. So how could we prevent the harm instead of waiting for it to happen and be like, yeah, we didn't know that could happen. So more like risk management and mitigation. So, okay, the conclusion is we need more diverse teams who seek to understand real users beyond this happy path. There's a lot of things you can do on the technological side with CSS, JavaScript, all of that, but it's also a lot about understanding the users. And then, yeah, we need more designer and developer collaboration so that we can go beyond the happy path, beyond this kind of pixel perfect mockup mentality that we still have, even though if we have like tools where we have variables and flexible stuff, we're still so obsessed with pixel perfection, and none of you users will basically experience your website the same way as another one. So yeah, let's go beyond this pixel perfection obsession and really try to understand how to go in the browser and make sure it reflects in the products. And I've got something for you, so it's in the slide. Maybe I should have done a little bit bigger. But yeah, I tried to summarize the whole talk with different layers, from the different states to designing for different layouts, designing for user preferences, to kind of bigger, more abstract thing of beyond the assumptions. And you can download it there if you want. So yeah, that's all I have for you today. Thank you.